Welcome to the 9th South-South Forum on Sustainability. Let me introduce myself. My name is Lau Kin Chi, coordinator of the program on Cultures of Sustainability, Center for Cultural Research and Development of Lingnan University in Hong Kong. I have taught in Lingnan University for 35 years. I am also a founding member of the Global University for Sustainability and director of its executive team. I have been involved in the rural reconstruction movement in China for over 2 decades, and I'm also board member of the PeaceWomen across the globe. Lingnan University has been the organizer of the South-South Forum on Sustainability since the very beginning, and joined by the Global University for Sustainability since the 3rd forum in 2016. This year, the China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation joins as organizer. There are 12 co-organizers that have supported the South-South Forum for many years. This year, the theme of the forum is the collapse of modern civilization and the future of humanity. It follows on the theme of last year's forum, which was the politics of hope, people's resilience and resistance in catastrophic times. It looks like the year 2022 will go down in human history as a turning point, accelerating towards global societal and environmental collapse. The reconfiguration of geopolitical blocs after the Russia-Ukraine war, the millions of deaths with the COVID pandemic, the economic downturn with severe food and energy insecurity for large numbers of the world population, and the irreversible devastations of the climate collapse, all these compel us to reject the promises of so-called modern civilization and progress, which are underpinned by capitalism and science and technology. We are compelled to ask, how have we come to this point in human history? What needs to be done so that there is still a future for humanity? We cannot simply take an apocalyptic position and go down with despair, cynicism, or helplessness. That is why in this year's forum, we will have 35 webinars, and apart from analyzing the state we are in, we hope the over 110 panelists from over 30 countries will dialogue and debate on the question of the future of humanity. In most sessions, we invite one speaker to give a lead lecture of 45 to 60 minutes with 1 to 2 invited discussants to respond, and hopefully a focused exchange can take place among the panelists as well as with the audience. Now, in this inaugural lecture, we are most honored to have with us Professor DAI Jinhua. Professor DAI is a leading feminist cultural critic in China. She is professor in the Institute of Comparative Literature and Culture and director of the Center for Film and Cultural Studies at Peking University. Her research interests include popular culture, film studies, and gender studies. She is the author of many books, including Invisible Writing, Cultural Studies in China in the 1990s, Breaking Out of the Mirror City, Cinema and Desire, Masked Night, The Writings of Subcommander Marcos, After the Post-Cold War, The Future of Chinese History, among others. Her works have been translated into English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, Japanese, and Korean. Her literary, film, and TV commentary addresses a large audience in China. We will now listen to Professor DAI for an hour, followed by 2 eminent discussants, Muto Ichiyo-san and Professor Anita Rampal. I will introduce them before they speak. Now, over to you, Professor DAI.
各位的朋友们，晚上
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I am very glad that I can meet all of you here on the cloud, so-called on the cloud, to continue with this 9th South-South Forum. It's been 9 years. And the 3 years of them were held on the screen because of this pandemic. My great gratitude goes to Kin Chi and all the organizers to let me be the very first speaker of this session. I worry about not being capable of accomplishing this task well. I'll do my best. Today, I would like to share with you my observation of the ongoing development of the world situation, my own self and reflection. It might be quite cliche or platitude, and you might feel sad, unhappy, or even painful about these facts. I believe by sharing my observations, or as the very first speaker, to present you all these observations as common sense, to bring them to you so that we can launch a 1-month-long discussion, exchange, dialogue, and thinking, where my speech will mark the beginning. This year marks the 3rd year of the COVID-19 pandemics. For me, for anyone who's in Beijing like me, it has clearly exposed the problems of this world. This year, personally, it might be the most difficult year in my whole life. And this year we're experiencing the pandemics. We see that our neighboring country, Russia, is having a war with its neighbor, Ukraine. And it's still continuing to this day. And they just witnessed or they experienced an assassination in Japan. At the same time, we're having a bad time with the stock market. We've seen air crashes. We've also seen frequent violent crimes in the society. In addition to abundance of natural disasters and extreme weathers, all these seem to mark this year of 2022. And it's happening in this world, in our lives. At the same time, all the disasters, the catastrophes they created have an impact on hundreds of millions of people, even destroying their lives. At this very difficult time, in this extremely difficult year, we're holding the 9th South Forum, or let's say the 9th time where we get together or attempt to communicate, to exchange, to face squarely this difficult situation. We try to find a way out by getting together here. And following this, I would like to share with you that during this difficult time, faced with multifaceted, multiple crises, and this how the world is. Last year, I seem to have said the same thing. I said that this pandemic seems to be the best thing that makes us know that the globalization led by capitalism, Internet of Things, the Internet, the capitalist world system, and the division of labor and production. This globalization characterized by this is marked by the pandemic as not just a figure of speech, but something that we're in. It's a basic fact, but the fundamentals of this world, of the connection. and exchanging this world. Apart from the outbreak of this pandemic in various parts of the world, overall, we have this kind of complete isolation, confrontation, and pointing fingers at each other, designating enemies. And we're in this situation. In this process, we've seen extreme nationalism on the rise. We've seen right-wing populism on the rise. And it's not just something that's happening within the society, this right-wing populism thing. It has already metamorphosed into different forms of fascism. And against this general background, with the long-lasting competition for global market share, the clashes between for profits in this global capitalism, and these rivalries or competition have become more stark, more obvious. And my own observation is that all these confrontations, all these rivalries seem to have foreground pretension with ideology. They stopped doing so. And they had no longer tried to justify themselves with ethics or morals. They no longer pretend. Apart from this tendency, there are also different kind of appropriation, struggles, exploitation, and they are taking a more stark, more obvious form. It is very different from that in the 20th century, and it is happening in different parts of the world at a large scale. All these, for example, the war between Russia and Ukraine, this violence, this war, this extremism, all the risks and threat that comes from this that have never happened before are right before our eyes, in our face. The pandemic is continuing, and obviously it's a threat to human lives. Accompanying this is also this new technological revolution marked by new technology in biology and the digital industry. It is pushing forward the so-called reorganization of labor and production regime. The pandemic is creating around the world large-scale bankruptcy of medium and small-sized companies. It's not a problem with the unemployed, what the word they used to call, but with what I would like to refer to as the abandoned people. I use this term to describe a thing that this new wave of technological revolution is embodied in upgrading of the industry, unprecedented automation, which caused a large proportion and an extremely large number of laborers, workers, who in this process became the access people. In an absolute term, they are no longer needed by the labor system, by the production system. they became quotation mark, people who need to be digested, end of quotation mark. And this is the case all over the world. As such, the pandemic exacerbated this tendency. And the tendency itself is not slowing down or weakening because of these pandemics. So at the same time, they say that the so-called technological revolution, which is marked by digital technology, network technology, metadata, or whatever terms you want to use, that have packaged itself as breakthroughs of human civilization. These processes are not only creating large numbers of abandoned people. According to the US elites, this round of technological evolution is making 98% of the whole population, make the 98% of this population excessive population. They became redundant in this new system. This system, while abandoning these people, they rely on this new technology in the name of statistics and big data. But also with those inhumane machines and inhumane perception and inhumane treatment of data, that they make these abandoned people no longer there. They are no longer visible in the economic system. So they are not only abandoned, they are also being effaced from these. They are no longer visible on all the so-called screens in the system. And it is also because taking advantage of this pandemics, we see that the surveillance society around the world has naturally, logically, and irresistibly replaced the so-called disciplinary society. This whole world is under more control, but behind it is capital. When it has to be, there is technology and it's inhumane, and the world is more than ever under this kind of control. The pandemic itself at the same time as a major crisis, a major challenge to survival of human beings as a whole, well, also as the most obvious fact of our society. In these 3 long years, well, we don't know if it's going to continue or how long it's going to continue. During this long process, the pandemics have covered up our attention to the other problems that are happening in this world. It has stopped us from questioning, reflecting, and probing deeper, or even trying to make breakthrough with these.
Such as the problem of the war, of the ecology, and all kinds of conflicts. In all sense, we have all kinds of these conflicts between race, between social groups. All kinds of conflicts are under the cover of the pandemic, or it has been hidden by the violence that is taking advantage of this pandemic. This is at this difficult moment, in this in the depths of the crisis. This is what I have observed. And they have been highlighted, they have been brought into the light, but at the same time hidden by the pandemic and also been exacerbated by the pandemic. Or we can say that the pandemic has succeeded in it is the situation that has been brought out by the pandemic. And on the other side, from the point where on the sense that I have been more on the sense where I'm more familiar with, in order to explain this situation, we can see that this new technological revolution, in one sense, it has reshaped the whole structure. It has produced a completely new, which is very different from the capitalism in the old time. It is a new type of values, a new set of values, which has a new position of the people and the society. And in this system, in China, we have a new word. We have a word that comes from Japan, which is called hikikomori, and in English it means home living. This home living has kind of, it seems like it has fulfilled a person's life, as if one can live alone outside the world, outside the society. Of course, I don't have to go further on this topic. We know that this apparently individualist, this extreme state of living has exacerbated each individual, that they are part of the society. They are in a controlled state in the society. This plight of individualism also correspond to, or they also present the new situation or this new crisis of another world, another way of living. Compared to the life before the pandemic, we can feel more close to our skin the end of the end of the Cold War. The so-called the capitalism has won. We are left with the trauma that we can feel what is left behind. I used to describe this situation as the post-revolution, and I would like to use a term that I like to use, although it might be wrong grammatically. I like to call it that we feel we are in the world that is after the post-revolution. And I would like to use this term to express that in this kind of world where the production, consumption, the livelihood, which everything is structured by the new world, by the new revolution, but it actually corresponds to, for 30 years, after the end of the Cold War, the situation what we have experienced in the whole world, which is not justified. This situation that is not just is disintegrating the organicity of the world, of the society. it is taking away the way that we can to organize ourselves and to serve ourselves. It has put out all the possibility of the discourse and all the possibility of practice. I called the earlier the plight of individualism, and this later I call it as we can see, when the pandemic starts, we experience or observed in anywhere of the world that after the loss of organicity, after the possibility of self-help, we can observe all kinds of catastrophe that is taking place. This is what I would like to share with everyone, that on the sense of the society, and also psychology. And another situation that is connected to the after post-revolution and also linked with the end of Cold War. Also the new technological revolution, and also the so-called four-wing victory of the capitalism. It has left a very weird situation on the society. At least I can observe in China. And also, as far as I can study, I don't want to call it interesting, but it is an interesting situation. I use two terms to call this interesting situation. The first one, after examining the pop culture in China and also in the world, I noticed that there are two types of points I didn't notice before. First, I noticed that in pop culture and in mass subculture, in many different places, we can see a naked capitalist competition and the capitalist logic, and also this kind of so-called the fittest survive the fittest and the winner takes all logic. But this is not what I'm going to focus on today, because I do have my observe in this aspect, because this is also called the Hunger Game situation, where it is presented as the most popular kind of video games in nowadays. The narrative, the structure of the most popular video game nowadays is based on the same concept. That is like only the fittest survive. All the winner comes from the death of the others. In order to survive, I have to kill the others, and the death of the others can confirm the position as a winner. And of course, here I'm not going to give more instances here. And you might also notice that the TV show that of Netflix, the Squid Game, as you can observe in that show, all the other people's death is the fortune's accumulation. But again, this is not what I'm going to focus on today. What I would like to share today is another 2 points, because this kind of Hunger Game is the same logic as what I've shared in the first part, that nowadays we don't need the dressing up of the personification as all of the mythology. We don't need to beautify the conflicts of interest. And it's just another highlights of this kind of global logics. So what I would like to share with everyone that in the pandemic has clarified this kind of psychology of the mass. On the one side, I would like to call it the subconscious awareness. I know this sounds like it's a dilemma, it's kind of contradictory, because subconscious means like it's something where our conscious cannot reach, which we cannot bring into light. But then again, I use the word of awareness, because awareness means like you can sense it. The reason why I use this contradictory term is because in the whole world, I can notice that it's very clear when people they are in a situation that is changed, structured by the new technological revolution, it seems like people stop to asking the change of the technology, the advance of the technology, what we pay to get that, what price we are paying for having this kind of new technology. People stop asking that. And also they stop to ask that in order to let this technology to apply to the whole world, is it at the same time that the modernist logic, the modernity logic is again taking over people's life in a victory way? And this logic itself also inevitably causing a crisis. It drives people's existence into a continuous self-destruction way. This has been talked about, has been alerted and discussed long before. When they become our daily life, it seems like we stop noticing that, we stop to questioning it. The voice of alert, it seems, is already too far away from us. How come when we are far away from these technologies, when they are still not, when they were not within reach, we would have some kind of questioning and some kind of suspicious and also discussion. But when they are already among us, when they are become part of our daily life, this kind of voices, this kind of questionings has disappeared. So from my point of view, I think this is what we are facing now, which is a very serious situation, because it is a subconscious awareness. From what I observe, I don't think there has been any kind of similar situation around the world. There are lots of people, they actually are aware of the situation that we are facing, but they also notice that there is a pre-context that in this modernist civilization process cannot be stopped. Once it is started, it will keep going. In order to change this logic, in order to question this logic, the endeavors to question this logic has been declared as impossible. The reason why this kind of announcement can become a so-called a common sense around the world, the reason is because to some extent we are still in the trauma. We are still affected by the trauma from the big failure of the 20th century. We are still living in the relics of that big failure. The reason why I say so because I have another term to describe the another so-called syndrome that I observed in the modern days. I noticed that in the pop culture, there's this kind of self-hypnotizing or even self-convincing. In this pop culture, I don't think they are more gentle than me. They did tell people what the situation of the world, the crisis that the world is facing, but at the same time, they also express another kind. They also have another kind of narration, which is another narrative. They do say that the world is facing big problems, is facing big crisis, and is in the way of finishing itself. It seems like in 2020, I can notice that there are men in China that lots of texts that I have come to know that lots of people are using the form of fiction. Although lots of authors were not like used to this kind of format, but they started to use the fiction, science fiction, as their way of expression, and the topic is the same, which is the doomsday. At the beginning, they all have this kind of narrative that this civilization that we are in is end days. The countdown has started. So that's why I say everyone is very aware of the situation. Nobody is alive. Nobody is being hypnotized. But on the contrary, in this kind of self-awareness and observe, they have a stronger expression that saying that the world is really in a very bad situation, and our civilization is facing extinction, and it could affect the whole population, the whole human beings. But we don't have a choice. But we don't have a way to change it. All kinds of changing efforts, all kinds of endeavors to trying to change the structure, all kinds of this kind of efforts only means only means further plights, only means loss in the end. So on one hand, people are critiquing the brutality of the structure of the world, but on the other, they are in awe of this order. They are scared of losing of this order, of this status quo. So in their mind, in their structure of words, it becomes this kind of self-convincing, and even further to a self-hypnotizing. Yes, the word is very, very bad, but there is no other better word. That's what they are thinking. All kinds of dreams of another word, of an alternative. It could mean another bigger problem, that we might lose this world. We might be in a deepened crisis. So the reason why I don't want to discuss the so-called this kind of running for life logic, but to discuss this self-consciousness and subconscious awareness and self-hypnotizing, which is shown in the pop culture as a way of disrupting the society, because in its turn it gives us a challenge.
It's questioning us to face with this. What are tasks in our work, what we work for, our thoughts on where we should position ourselves, our orientation in our work, how we would like to work, how we are working. So where we should want to position ourselves. How do we do that? On the one hand, there is this long-lasting so-called left-wing critics, these intellectuals, this anti-globalization movement. Our work is to criticize, to expose, to tell others what are the lies, what are the pretense, to tell everyone what we're going through, what they had gone through, and what they will go through, the crisis of this world, so that people can see those who are deprived, but also hidden. We want to let people see these. But today, my own thought is that maybe the majority does not need to be told. They are sharing the same observation with us. They are sharing with us the same judgment of the world's conditions. They refuse to really make their observation something they could share. It's because at the same time, they also accept or say they also share that there are no other alternatives to this world. There's no saving grace for this world. There's no alternatives or choice for the way out. So at this time, criticism or critical work, are they still meaningful? If so, on what grounds, to what degree? Because you cannot wake up someone who's pretending to sleep. You can wake someone who's really sleeping, but not someone pretending to do so. On the other hand, this consensus, this system has lost its organicity in a long-lasting depoliticizing process, in a state that is isolated. The new social mobilization, new social association, the recovery of social organics, where we could find a way out for these. My observation, personal one, an interesting one, is this. Because of this COVID-19 pandemic, this crisis caused by this pandemics in different parts of the world, because of this, were in different forms of exceptions. And more fearful to mention is that these kind of exceptions may become the new norm because of the pandemics. So this normalization of the exception, their clash on parts of the society, especially the middle and upper ones, makes it once again initiate some classic liberalist slogans and plans. In other sides, under other conditions, it seems to be once again in economic survival, and in terms of rights and interests, it pushes people to have some slogans and way out for those who are deprived, who are exploited. What I think what is interesting but also dubious is that the condition we're facing, this world exposed by the pandemics, by capitalism, by financial capital, or even this world constructed by the new technology under which there is capitalism. What we face is a new structure. So is it possible we can form something, some form of new resistance, new struggles through old prescriptions, whether it's classic liberalism or it's some very simple, primitive ones for social movement? Is it possible to confront a new situation with old project, old schemes? If it's possible, where we're going? If it's not possible, where are the new possibilities? Through criticism, through exposure, through criticizing and exposing the results, the outcomes they have achieved in the past, are they still applicable now? If not, our current work, no matter it's societal or it's cultural, how we can do this and to what extent, on what ground? It's about the end, almost to the end of my speech. Last of all, I want to share with you is that I think all the struggles, the crisis, the problems of the world that we're experiencing, they are very rampant, age-old throughout this capitalist society. It is just that it has been armed by new technology, so it became stronger, and it launched an attack of human beings as a whole in a stronger way, more robust way. I believe that the old ways cannot help us to deal with the new situation. And the new starting point is that we have to admit that we're at a point of ignorance. We don't know how to work, how to organize, how to confront, how to think about the alternatives and ways out for global capitalism. In some way, it's black. And we should try with our ignorance, with our blank, as a new starting point for us. As I said, this time, what we're facing is not just capital, not just the power who represents capital, who acts on behalf of capital. Well, what I'll say my observation is that this time capital doesn't even need to use capitalists. It does not need to be personified. And sometimes what we see is that capital is destroying capitalists. So what we face is not the invisible upper level power machines of capitalism, of capital. What we face is what is created and serves capital, something that is inhumane. It's not a figure of speech. It's the actual status. It's some kind of machine, some technology, something created by humans, but in the end, eventually excluded humans. This enormous, this giant machine, this giant inhumane system. This system, I'll say this machine, as I've shared with us before, every day, every minute, every second, it's increasing the number of the so-called abandoned people. And they've coined this word and they are casting these abandoned people away. And what they see during this pandemic is that, during this ongoing pandemic, is that in the 20th century and even earlier, because of the those time marked by the Paris Commune, this long-lasting struggle, which came to some fruitful results like labor law, like social security, like rights of labor, are under the clash of the pandemics and new technology. They are collapsing now. At the same time, what they see is that COVID-19, again, in the developed parts of the world, in global civilization, it highlights material development, material production, and the laborers who produce those material. They highlighted the existence of these. It is because the pandemics forced human beings to fall back to the most fundamentals of survival. But this highlights it's being part of the national narratives like food security and something like this. In terms of administration, ruling, they are highlighted in this regard. Apart from this, in no way are they making laborers, making material production in this general system of the world, in culture of this world, or in the representation of this world, more visible. And what we see is that the so-called new technology further dehumanizing labor as something inhumane, something that seems to no longer need humans. They make them the end of the capitalist production chain, something that is replaceable anytime, literally anytime. Faced with this general situation, I would say maybe we have to admit our ignorance. Admit ourselves in this blank state. Our possibilities now are in this state of to be created, to be found, to be discovered. Maybe this is a beginning, a new beginning for us to start anew. Although unprecedentedly, we know that we are just very small flesh and blood beings faced with this global, something armed with global capitalism, also motivated by this global capitalism, faced with this inhumane surveillance system. This is what we're in, the situation we're in. What we have now, in my own very unacademical word, what we have is that we do not accept that we have lost, because here we also represent human beings. If our survival, our future still have a possibility, we're still able to survive, or it's something that is worthy of trying to fight for, trying to work for. If it's a goal or a target like that, they must have hope and carry on. But the prerequisite, the precondition is that we have to face it squarely, that the capitalist globe has changed, and see how the pandemics has changed. What the pandemics has changed. See how the new modern civilization of capitalism, what this thing is doing because of this pandemics. We should face it. We should admit that our past schemes, our past systems, faced with this new situation, may seem ineffective or even useless. But it does not mean that we want to give up. We want to stop. What we mean is that we want to call for more sustainable working method, innovative call If our current civilization makes 98% of human population is in a state of absolute access, then the civilization itself, the population that is seen, that it tries to efface, to eliminate, this presence is where the civilization resides in. It's being surrounded by this presence and besieged by this. Therefore, whether illogically, theoretically, or in this way, an alternative can be created by human society. Human being itself, the majority of it, is in the struggle for survival. It is trying to create in this struggle for survival. What can we do during this process? This is what I would like to share with you. My own observations, my own thoughts. I seem always to be sharing with Ken Chi something by Mr. or a cultural personality Lu Xun. He says that despair, as with hope, it's the same with hope. In the past, I thought that hope is elusive. By the age of 50, I almost understood that. Like, despair is also elusive. We do not have to be afraid of admitting that we're in despair. Very often, we're hopeless. We can just admit that we're once again in a state of ignorance, in a state of unknown. But whether it's elusive, whether it's despair, it is also hope. Because human beings want to survive. They have to survive. And they have to fight for a future for the majority of it. Fight for a tomorrow of it, so that they won't be destroyed because of the collapse of capitalism. This struggle for survival itself will necessarily be a creative or innovative beginning. This is something that has to happen. This is a necessary process, but can we make more contribution? Do something more effective, more powerful for this? Every time I question myself and try to encourage myself with these questions. So, thank you. Here are the very common sense things I would like to talk about.
I think it is so important to recognize what Lu Xun said, that if we feel that hope is vain and futile, so is despair. So, so I think Professor Dai actually concludes with a very positive note that if we still feel that we need to strive for survival, then there would be the dynamics that would enable us to look for different ways to survive. So now I would like to invite Muto Ichiyo-san to be the discussant. And Muto Ichiyo-san was born in 1931 in Tokyo. He is a writer on political and social affairs and activist engaged in the anti-war movement and other social movements since the 1950s. He was active in the anti-Vietnam War Beheiren movement, inaugurated English magazine Ample, founded the Pacific Asia Resource Center in 1973, and played a leading role in organizing the People's Plan for the 21st Century project. He founded the People's Plan Study Group in Tokyo in 1998. He had taught at the State University of New York at Binghamton from 1983 to 2000. He is the author of many books on Japanese movements and history. His article on the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident and Japan's potential nuclear armament is collected in the book I co-authored on the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident. So, Muto-san, over to you.
I'm very, very glad to be here and to listen particularly to DAI Jinhua. I respect her and not only respect, but feel sharing something very deep in common. As always, she tonight made a brilliant, in-depth, and pessimistic and optimistic analysis of what we have, what we are now. I'm given 15 minutes, and so I can't talk very much about all the interesting aspects told by DAI Jinhua. I think the most important point, I asked for some summary of what she was going to say, and so I got it. And a note I got from her, which is a very, very interesting piece of writing, where she says that the world is not under hypnotism by the ruling ideology. On the contrary, it is that people would rather close their eyes and ears, rather prepare to be ignorant or to believe, because they are still in some ways in the state of trauma from the big failure of the 20th century. This is her description of the people now, maybe in China, maybe and largely in Japan. In the Japanese situation, this is the problem, the major problem we face for activists. People are so silent, so passive, and not really ignorant, but don't want to think. This kind of situation prevails. Where I approach this from a little bit different point of view. That is the notion of empires. What was the Cold War? That was a confrontation between two empires, the United States of America and the Soviet Union, which was understood as a struggle between communism, not of capitalism, but freedom. So American and America's empire was called Free World. The Soviet Union, I'm not talking about how successful or how failed the Soviet Union was. But anyway, it stood for some cause: socialism, communism, liberation. So they had some principle. Whether it was properly implemented or not is another story. But still, it was a very strong principle that guided the behavior of that empire. The other empire is for freedom, for democracy, etc., etc. they meant it. That meant that they defend capitalism, but they didn't say so. As ideology and in the idea of the state, idea of the world, they had some principle, some universal principle as they believed. So it was a clash between two principles. So actually, people had to be very serious in engaging themselves in action. They meant it. But that confrontation is gone. It collapsed and ended in the unilateral victory of one empire, the American empire. Now we have conflicts. It's a major conflict involving many countries between basically the United States and China, the People's Republic of China. What is the nature of this conflict? Is it the clash between two principles? You have to examine. I think there is no such thing. America says that they are for democracy, they are for human rights, and so they justify the encirclement of China in the Pacific and the calling in of all the former imperialist, colonialist countries into the Pacific in order to create encirclement of China. They say that they are for democracy and that so justice with them, but I don't think they really mean it. India is a great friend now, a very strange thing because India never was a friend to America, but America says it is now. But it's not a democratic country. It calls itself the largest democratic nation in the world, but it's, what is it? We have many friends there, and their life, if they resist the present government, their life is threatened by fundamentalists. So this conflict is a fake. It's a real conflict, but it's not the conflict between two principles. So what we have now is a loss of principle, loss of the standard of justice. We have, I say many things, but we don't really mean it. If you really want to change the world and take some position and have some kind of strategy and some spiritual motivation, then you have principle. But there's no such thing now. Well, so it's almost 10 minutes. 5 minutes more. Okay. I think what we need is to revive justice, to revive principle, not as an ideology, but as the thinking and crystallization of the life practices which are ongoing. in spite of all those hypnoptic sort of phenomenon, still the struggle is going. And I think different mentality prevails. For instance, in Latin America at the moment, in Latin America, you have such lively movement and such anger shared by millions and millions of people who actually act and overthrow the worst kinds of governments. So Colombia even. Why? I think the element that made it possible is the presence of the indigenous people as the most important spiritual and movement element, giving no room for self-hypnotic mentality. People, there's no such room there. And I think if we look from that angle, such a thing is there everywhere throughout the world. Yet we haven't yet established our own principles, our own justice, standard of justice, which actually sort of inspires and goes us to action. I think there are two things. One is to create a certain group of countries, maybe South-South, but not necessarily South-South, for a new non-aligned nations, another abandon. But more important is to start trying to create trans-empire alliance of the people, which I think Global University, Lau Kin Chi, and our friends are doing from Hong Kong. And such a thing is being done. But now we need to get together in order to discuss our sort of strategy, our exchange, our view of the world today, and restart our movement. Because the conflicts of empires, I think there are more than 2 empires. And we need to get the people in those empires also to come together, pledging that we are not going to kill each other. I think that is the most important point. People declare that we don't kill each other because war is killing, and killing is murder, and murder is a crime. And that should be made very clear at the base. And I think DAI Jinhua's inspiration tells me that we must work together for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muto-san. Actually, you still have 3 more minutes, but then maybe you can come into the dialogue later in the later session. So now I would like to invite Professor Anita Rampal. She is a physicist by training. She was the Dean of the Faculty of Education in DAI University. She is an executive committee member of the International Commission on Mathematics Instruction. She was a Nehru Fellow Director of the National Literacy Resource Center at the National Academy of Administration, Missouri, and was involved with the National Curriculum Framework 2005, as well as the chairperson of the NSERT primary textbook development teams. She has been part of national policy advisory committees, educational initiatives of states, the right to education, the People's Science Movement, national literacy campaigns, and the Hoshangabad Science Teaching Program. She works in the areas of policy studies, curriculum studies, education for sustainable development, critical mathematics education, science, technologies, society studies, and teacher education. So we are very happy to have you with us, Professor Rampal. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kinchi, and it's such an honor to be with all of you, especially after this long COVID isolation that many of us were feeling in terms of how people have interacted. I take off from what I heard both DAI and Muto-san speak in terms of how they are looking at the challenges before us. And I also want to say that, yes, I mean, COVID, in fact, has really brought in something which was, the kind of dehumanizing devastation that we have seen upfront. I have lost family, I have lost close friends, gasping for oxygen. And these are some things that, are indelibly marked in our own bodies and our minds. I have myself been through a very difficult COVID pneumonia in hospital. Luckily, I was there in time. So, the protocols had been set. And what was interesting when we saw this pandemic coming in was that on the one hand, the Director General of WHO had warned us and said that we are not just fighting an epidemic, we are fighting an infodemic. Fake news spreads faster and more easily than this virus and is just as dangerous. And he advocated, of course, that we must have science and policy and evidence must be leading our decisions, because he said if we don't, then we are headed down a dark path that leads nowhere but towards division and disharmony. And we must be guided by solidarity, not stigma, because the greatest enemy that we are facing is, this stigma, and we have to stop this hate. But what I can say from where I am, we have seen this entire pandemic, on the one hand, of course, with irrevocable losses, with the kind of economic despair that people have felt, with the kind of abandonment that Dai was talking about of migrant labor, thousands and millions of migrant labor completely abandoned because a lockdown was declared just in a couple of hours. And cities could think that we can all sit at home, not really realizing what it means, how these cities run, how life runs, who is running this life for people, and what is going to happen to them. So complete abandonment. Our schools were closed for about 2 years, completely abandoned. I mean, the most disadvantaged areas, schools were, literally abandoned, and no one ever went there. Children, their meals abandoned. So, I mean, having seen this, but on the other hand, as Muto suggested, we're also seeing a kind of how this lockdown and clampdown actually aided a kind of authoritarianism that has affected life all through. Every day we are finding people who fought for human rights, who fought for democratic rights, who fought for, who are fact checkers and fighting against fake news, are the ones who are facing unimaginable charges and the kind of allegations that are completely inexplicable. So, people are calling it an ethnocracy now, what we are headed towards, a kind of electoral authoritarianism, because even the elections now are not level playing fields. So what kind of resistance do we find? We've had a farmers' movement during the COVID, which was amazing. I mean, it was the kind of resistance that we haven't seen for a long time. And during the lockdown, the way farmers came, because they were fighting against agricultural laws which were going to really be damaging for them. So that gave people hope that even though everyone was locked down, there was, there were these hundreds of thousands of farmers sitting on the borders, going through all kind of very difficult conditions, and yet saying and being told that they don't understand how these laws are going to be good. But that resistance actually brought a lot of hope and brought energy to people who were otherwise, their movements, and even students who were being put into prison just because they were fighting for a good quality education, or or even the laws which were segregating people on the basis of religion. So I want to say that we've seen sort of both kinds of movements happening. Yes, there is a lot of despair, but we've also seen how education technologies, because I work in education and I work in people science, so both these areas for us has been important to see what the impact has been. On the one hand, we find that everything, I mean, the new policy came in during the lockdown. So, all these labor laws and education policies, after 36 years, the policy comes in when everything is locked down. So there is no debate, the parliament is closed, so, I mean, these are the ways certain things were getting pushed down people. And that's why the kind of need to understand what ways do we now address these issues, because we are finding that there is a kind of disaster capitalism, the way technologies take over, whether it's in surveillance. And we know that Harari had said very early that the world has two choices. Either we get into this complete surveillance, actually it's dataveillance, because we find how even young children were being told, and their privacy and their data is being collected almost like a biocapital from the global south. You have children sitting in front of screens and doing something, and all that data of every little hesitation that a child must be showing without understanding what's going on, that data is actually adding to the biocapital of companies which are coming. And billionaires have got made because of this technology. So on the both sides, we are finding the kinds of challenges that are before us. But I want to say that one thing that had struck me when I was myself in hospital, and even the senior doctors could not come and see us, it was the younger staff and the healthcare workers. I was quite amazed by the way, in this situation when everyone was worried, people were worried that they might be they might give this virus to their own families. They were seeing people die every day, and yet the most hope and the most care one got from the lowest level of the health workers. So, humanity and empathy has a way of osmosing out of all these barriers, out of all these paywalls and barriers and cracks, and whatever you might try to do. Really, I mean, they were giving us hope that we will survive this, even though they were seeing people die every day. So I think that the way, even though we know that our country has seen a history of social distancing, which is actually related to caste and untouchability, and it's something that there's been enough of struggle and resistance against it. But even within the social distancing, and we were calling it physical distancing because we don't like the word social distancing. Everyone is sort of, we have a long history of stigma around social caste and untouchability. But in that too, we could find that there was hope in people completely unknown, people themselves suffocating in their PPP, their PPE attires, but the way, just through looking through the eyes, that you could see people were helping each other. And I think that was the kind of feeling, and that was the kind of energy that one was getting in terms of how do we connect. So another thing that happened at that time was that I was writing something on wisdom and education, and I happened to just read that someone I had not known much about, David Graeber, an anthropologist, whom I had only known through his very famous slogan called "We are the 99%." He became a victim of COVID. He died. And it was almost like a personal loss. It was like another COVID co-traveler suddenly succumbed to a very aggressive form of disease, which they said was linked to COVID. But he had just given to humanity a kind of a major tome of his work called The Dawn of, the Dawn and a New History of Humanity. So the dawn of everything and a new history of humanity. And I started reading this book and I was amazed. I was amazed by the kind of rigorous research, the kind of rigorous understanding, the bringing together of various strands of disciplines and the deep, deep learnings that, people, and I noticed this, that during the COVID period, there were a lot of deep learnings and deep histories from various disciplines. So this was something that gives hope. This is something that when I look at now, when I look at what does humanity, the future for humanity mean for me, I would, probably just like to quote or read out from how I abstracted this understanding. And so in this, a new history of humanity, which is almost like his last gift to humanity, which is deluged by the pandemic, there is a profound power which can buoy us and give us some hope, because what he is saying, and a new perspective of humanity itself, because he says that when they look at rigorously, a lot of historical and anthropological data, it contradicts conventional narratives of human progress. And they present ideas through an indigenous critique by societies that have practiced freedom, equality, and mutual care. And they're saying that we have lived like that for millennia. It's just that we don't seem to be aware and not looking back enough. And we're looking only at those things which tell us that there is no alternative. So we're looking at a very small window, a sliver of history, which is not giving us the true picture of how we have lived. So he says that if we change dramatically the questions that we ask of history, for instance, if history is not defined through the technologies and the sporadic revolutions like the Stone Age or the agricultural and the Industrial Revolution, but if we see the continual social creativity of human societies, he says, then we can ask, we can try and say, is there a positive correlation between women's freedom and the degree of innovation in a society? He says, why don't we ask this question? Because it gives us much more significant answers and it gives us a new look on humanity. On the other hand, he also says that how did we lose the ability to freely recreate ourselves by recreating our relationships with one another? Because he says, why is it that at what point in time did violence or domination get the sanction of law? I mean, even of care. I mean, how is it that brutally wives can be beaten up, or children can be bashed in schools or in families, or public spectacles of lynching or public torture or even public decimation of Ukraine that we are watching and seeing? How is it that this got normalized? When is it that this got normalized? So we have to question this when we look back at our history. And so he says, if we shift our lens from the science of domination and domestication, which we have always stuck to and we think as if that's the only lens, when we shift it from fixed agriculture to looking at play farming, when we look at innovative flood retreat civilizations, Neolithic ecology, when we look at all these things, then we can see that it's a science of bending and coaxing. It's a science of nurturing and cajoling, or even tricking the forces of nature. And he says that archaeologically, when people call them goddesses, actually these could be women scientists who were actually very intimately experimenting with not just tectonic materials, not just soils and insulation and but also vehicles of abstract thought. And he said the most important thing is that they were binding together new forms of relationships between men and women, between people and animals. And he says that this is the future point of time. when we can look back at anomalies and we can say that maybe, stone pyramids or something like that are just curiosities, but actually it's this kind of land management or caretaking and ownership rather than extraction, which is happening in the climate crisis and the climate ecological injustices that we are seeing. They can be gotten over if we look back carefully enough at the way societies have lived. And I think that this kind of thing, another deep history of humankind, which I find really very, very inspiring, is by Bregman, who's written the book called Humankind. And the main important thing he says is that humans have evolved through survival of the friendliest. So he's questioning the time when he says that it was like a homo puppy, like we had smaller bodies and rounder skulls than the Neanderthals who'd come before us. He says we seemed to be weaker and less brainy, but how is it that our tools were more complex? And so a lot of emphasis now is coming on social learning. When was it that humans really were most innovative? When they actually learned from each other. And that's why he says survival of the friendliest, because we were, for us, and it's important to see, he said, it's almost like in COVID, it hits you, it goes under your skin, because it touches our pandemic pulse when he says that we long for togetherness. And he says that is crucial for human achievement. He says that it is as old, this truth is as old as the hills, and we know what our ancestors, how they have done and how the collective that they have created. So he says it's like loneliness can literally make us sick. So human beings crave togetherness and interaction, and our spirits yearn for connection, just as our bodies yearn for food. So for me, this is really important, because I think what we are doing today in terms of our interactions, in terms of our ways of looking at learning, this individualism, this individualistic way, and more so now with these technologies and all these screens coming in and this interaction coming in, is that we are actually not understanding the most creative way and the most potent way that humans are made for in terms of social learning. So I think that is crucial. And also interesting thing like Steven Pinker, when he writes about rationality, and he wonders why irrationality today is ruling the roost. Why is this post-truth? And we are seeing it in our country, how, vigilantism and social media can be totally, it's not just hypnotism, but it's almost like you're on a high, it's addictive. And psychologists are telling us that looking at fake news is much more, gives you a kick, it gives you a high. So you don't want to look at what the truth is, because this is what is giving you that high. And what is the reason for this irrationality? And I think, again, someone working like Steven Pinker says that we have to understand that these cognitive tools that we have actually got from our past are tied to the content of lived experience. And when we look at the world, anthropologists also tell us that we shouldn't look at the world as a globe. We can't look at it as if we are on outside, but humans all through the past have looked at it as if they are part of that spherical sphere, and that's the way they pay attention to the environment around them, to the non-human surroundings that have been part of their living in what we say is sustainable ways of living. So the present times of false truths which undermine democracy and promote tyranny, and they give deep reasons for worry. Again, Pinker is telling us that it's important to understand that rationality is a collective ability. It's not necessarily an individual ability. It comes when a group can check each other's fallacies. And when we are not just in those bubble chambers where we are not even cross-checking something, but we are in free space and we are attuned to checking each other's fallacies. And he's telling us, he's talking of the sapience or the wisdom of Homo sapiens, and telling us that even hunter-gatherers were rigorously analyzing the data that they saw. They were collectively using intuitive logic and critical thinking. And that's why they were checking each other's fallacies. So I want to say that after sharing the same kind of concerns and probably even more in the current context from where I come, understanding the role of technologies, understanding science, not just as extraction and something which is giving, which is creating more divides and inequalities, but understanding that human beings do have a humanity which we can look back and try and understand, and the most creative ways, which I think initially when the COVID came, we as scientists were really quite amazed to see how within no time people sort of broke barriers of patents and preprints, and they shared knowledge. That sharing of knowledge was not tied to nationalism, like later on nationalism came into vaccines when vaccine production and profit started showing up. But the first genomic coding that was done, the first understanding of protocols, the first understanding of the disease actually happened in the most amazing solidarity, scientific solidarity. So I think we have seen both these aspects, and I think in our work, in our mobilization, we will need to really strengthen our faith in the human capacity to work together, to crave for connections and to crave for togetherness, and then work towards a sense of justice, as Muto was just talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. So Anita has spoken from her very long years of experience working with the People's Science Movement, and so we have had this enthusiasm and this in the creativity of the people who would be usually marginalized in society. So we have had two very dynamic discussions, giving us very wise comments. So now I would like to invite Professor DAI to respond to some of the comments that were triggered by your speech.
其实没有能力真的做出回应哈。
Well, I don't think I'm really in the position to reply or respond. I'm really grateful and thankful for them both, for their very powerful responses. I would only like to take this opportunity to elaborate more on what they haven't talked about, but this is something I'll be elaborated on in the last Self Forum. I said that nowadays maybe we're in a powerlessness, in ignorance, in despair, is because all our thoughts are unconsciously false within the logic of modernism. Very often we unconsciously use our critic of capitalism in a divided, separated from our reflection of modernism. But they're actually the two sides of the same coin. What they want to try is, within the modernist logic, is a way to break through capitalism. This is a dilemma, or let's say it's what is not happening, what is absent from 20th century reflection.
We have been trying to use the concepts of modernism, but it's of the side of the utopian, to try to attack is the side of the negative side. And we didn't notice that the two of them actually are the two sides of one coin. So very grateful to Muto-san, who has give us of this notion about the 21st century's history, that in this history, the 20th century, that it has left us a legacy that can show us a way. And Anita has used the source of David Gaver to help us to examine from a different point of view and different set of values, to examine the history of human beings, to try to understand the history of human beings, and to find the history of human beings from its past. So I think both of the discussants have told us that there is a margin of the modernism or outside the modernism that will be able to think about our future or what we should be doing from outside the modernism. So this is what I have got from the comments. Again, I would like to dissipate some more pessimism, because that the whole world to some extent has been ruled by technologies, and this new technology, especially in the form of communications, has given us, when on one hand, a plight of conception about what is truth, if there is a truth, and how can we get to the truth, because all in all, it's a form, is a behavior of the medium, and it cannot get rid of the ruling the power structure. This kind of information dissipation, for example, the big data, the big data projection, we can see that it is just like what Anita has told us, that we have seen in human history. We have seen this kind of trying to survive, although we have difference in this kind of commons and this kind of sharing, to reach this kind of progress of our own. And today, in the homogeneity of information, in the form of trying to reinforce your conception, and in the form of the internet community, to beat on the people who holds a different idea. So we can see this kind of violence of words, of violence of speech in the internet. Through this violence, they are trying to reach that the different kind of view cannot enter the core, cannot enter into your vision, cannot enter into your concept. So just in addition, there are two additional points. First, on one hand, I don't trust what I see in the screen. I still look forward to physical and this physical encounter between lives, and to communicate face to face. And on our way to reach to the reality of different communities, and to understand what they understand, to express what they express, I think this is one point of the thing, or one point of what I was thinking about. Another hand, on the 20th century of the history of China's 20th century, I can strongly recognize that the people is not a natural existence. It cannot replace with that 99%. It's not the same. It's not a same concept. It's not the same fact, because people is a historical process, is how they mutually to understand each other and to recognize each other. It's a historical construction. It can be destroyed, but it also can be created. So how can we let people stop being a mythology, stop being a concept, but to become a reality, to become a power in this world? I think this is left to be done in order to survive. And also, it's something that we can do on different levels, the work that we can do on different levels. That's all I would like to add. Thank you.
Yeah.
So now I will start with a question from a student. So question number 1 from Lingnan. He actually wrote his question in the chat room, both in Chinese and in English. So the question is, Professor Dai, in front of the new, in front of the new order and new situation. As an academic researcher and as an educator, what do you think our research should be on nowadays? And how should we approach teaching? Perhaps imagination is an important part of it. How do we rebuild our imagination?
Your question is my question, so I cannot give you an answer. I cannot really give you a very ready-made question answer, because I am as a teacher, as a cultural worker, I'm also in the same situation, same dilemma. Maybe lots of works that we're doing will continue, but at the same time, I think we need to share what is changing and what has changed among the situations, among the status quo. I think this is our premise. Instead of putting the question in the old knowledge system, because in that way we will never to produce new knowledge, and our creativity, our imaginality will be suppressed. So this is my answer.
Professor Dai, you mentioned that people are aware of the crisis of capitalism, but they do not feel that there is another way out. Is it because the development model of capitalism cannot stop? Because once it stops, the entire order will collapse, and people cannot fathom what the world would be like when that happens.
我想你已经回答了这个问题哈。
I think you have already answered your own question, because this is one side that we are in the logic of the capitalism. Of course, that we have a lot of critics that it is already in the dead end and is accelerating at an accelerating speed. If we are still inside this logic, inside this system, and we can only follow it through, but we can already see that in these 3 years, lots of, for me, and the pandemic has such an image that all the airports becomes just like a parking lot for the airplanes. They once were flying on the sky, but now that word has stopped, has paused. So no matter whether you think it can stop, if this word will stop, actually what will happen is this word will come to a pause, or even come to a self-demise because of the system that it is in. So what I propose is that can we have another imagination outside this system? So this is one thing. And on the other, very grateful to Muto-san has repeated what I said, that the 20th century is the century where most people has trying to create another tomorrow and trying to create another world. That is the century, the 20th century, but it ended with the big failure. So no matter if we are conscious, we are aware of it, we are in the trauma. We are still living in the trauma. We're in such a trauma that we stop to thinking, we stop to imagining another world, how to make it happen, and we stop to thinking about the possibilities that we can change or to fight for the ideal. We didn't even try to do that list. That's why that there are such this kind of misception that we don't have a possibility. If tomorrow is going to end, let's just enjoy today. This is the kind of mindset that we have nowadays. So on one hand, you have already answered that if we are still in this logic, then we can only stay in that kind of thinking. So on the other hand, I just want to add this point that we are the children of the history. So no matter what, we are in that history.
Our friend from from Africa and the States, Nidri Asi Numumba. Please speak.
Oh, thank you so much. What a privilege to hear this insightful contribution to concern and also offering of ways to get out. We should not feel so trapped. My question, I was writing in the chat, but I'll take the opportunity to ask it directly. In the name of modernism, African societies were assaulted, they were declared without civilization. Yet, from everything I have heard, with the philosophy that is embedded in Ubuntu, collective well-being, that we're not the only being on earth. We have the environment, we have the animals, we have the trees. We were declared pre-logical because we're thinking that way. So how can we rethink collectively, individually and collectively, to have some humility and embrace those thoughts that really can offer a template to get out of this trap of capitalism and accumulation? Thank you.
So I think we first go back to a round with Professor Dai and Muto-san and Professor Rampal. So if you have short comments about the questions before I read out other questions from the Chinese audience. So Muto-san, would you like to say something? You didn't take up your 15 minutes.
Dai-san did a proper thing by picking up COVID. Because it actually embraced the whole world and in its deadly embrace. And there are sort of evils or problems that are not usually bad. Not usually outstanding. But I think the problem I mentioned, the matter of rebuilding the notion of justice in the midst of widespread antipathy is the major problem in societies like Japan, maybe somewhat in China too. Why it is so? I heard stories about the young people fighting against the bad aspects of Thai monarchy. They are fighting very energetically in the street. I asked them, what is your motivation? What justifies your struggle? So one interpretation that they go back to 1932. That is
Yes.
struggle for constitutional monarchy. And it's a beginning of democratization of Siam, Thailand. It was very interesting, going back to 32 in order to justify the struggle now. I think such as for the people to fight for change, we need some certain basis, moral basis historically sort of rooted basis. And the so-called globalization kind of neoliberal sweep just erased those basis roots. So that's what we have now. But as I said, such roots have not been totally uprooted. They are there, but they're hidden. And people are afraid to talk about, to think about it sometime. And young people are shielded from the discovery of the roots. And but the roots are not necessarily positive. The roots of the Japanese nation or Japanese people.
日本民族或者说日本人民的这条道路。
Yes.
是的。
Negative background, of course. So Japan expanded as an imperialist power, invading China, invading Korea, annexing Korea even, and so basing ourselves on the ground doesn't necessarily mean sort of pleasant, comfortable action. But that should be done. Otherwise, we can't think of the future. The future we need to build should be based on this historical review and the moral judgment, political judgment we make now in order to go ahead. So that's the kind of thing we need to face, and particularly in Japan. And the prime minister, the former prime minister who was assassinated today in Tokyo, in Nara, was the one who actually totally reversed that kind of approach and proved Japan to the adoration, the admiration of the past. He was killed by a former military man. So anyway, that's what we face now. And I think it is everywhere. It is so everywhere. And we can discuss this across borders. We can discuss it. We can exchange our findings and the positions we take now, no? Which may not be identical. It must be, there may be some conflict, but that's okay. So, but that kind of process, I think everything, all important thing is how to construct positive processes. And in order to construct such processes, you need somebody to do that. They are mediator or the catalyst. To add something, when the communist movement was very strong, the Communist Party was supposed to do that work in the best cases, not in most cases, but in best cases. The communists are to be such people. But the bad point is that you pick up those people from among the existing people's relations and put them together outside of the people. And then they wanted to play the role as a group. I think that is my reflection, because I was a member of the Japanese Communist Party in the 50s and early 60s, had that experience. And so, to build future, we need to find how people can get together. Different people can get together through mediation of certain kind, mediation immanent in the groups, not from outside. Well, that's how I feel about all those things.
Thank you, Muto-san. So Anita?
Student who was asking about how can we really invoke imagination, whether we are talking about teaching or we're talking about research, that is really very critical. In fact, now we find that more and more the modularization of certain courses, and in our case, of course, we're getting into a terrible situation for our undergraduate courses when they have been told that you can take half your credits from any online, any teaching shop, anything. So, even the depth of trying to understand, ask critical questions, and open out imaginations, I mean, that is so crucial. It needs time and it needs space. It needs space where the teacher is not just the one who's talking. So how do we get our students to be listening, talking, sharing? And I think that is very important in the ways that we teach, where students from diverse backgrounds, we can't have just monocultures within our classrooms or our universities. Diverse backgrounds are important because that's how imagination works. It's really when we allow ourselves to go beyond the kinds of boundaries which are normally set in very tight manners now in the way courses are devised. So especially in research, I think thinking out of the box, going to the field, asking questions which we are looking at even in the field, not just which are going to stay in a library. I think that is going to be so important if our young researchers, really bring that element.
So I now go to question number 3 from the Chinese audience. So it is Professor Dai. As an ordinary young person who did make attempts, I find myself now fallen into perplexity and have to resort to sweet Hollywood movies to help me through another week. Can you please give us young people some advice?
谢谢这个年轻朋友的信任。
Thank you for this young person's trust that he or she seeks advice from me. I would say let's go back to Lu Xun, that the real warrior has the courage to face a grave situation. It's okay to seek consolences from or comfort from sweet Hollywood movies, but we have to face squarely the reality and ask about various possibilities with me, with myself, or else the dreams that are created by Hollywood itself, the system, the dream making system is problematic in Hollywood. If you look at the past 2 Oscars, we see that it can no longer create sweet dreams. In some movies, we can see that they don't have logic with their imagination, and there's no way of judgment or no way of salvation. So I would like to suggest that you can see that some other more moderate more gentle movies where we can face squarely our problems and under this to seek the possibility for production creation under these new circumstances. Maybe our life may not become more beautiful, but at least it can be more enriched. This may be my advice. Thank you.
So Professor DAI and Professor Muto, the 3 years of COVID-19 pandemic has generated a sense of numbness and coldness on other people's suffering. Further, the world is getting more confrontational and antagonistic. Under this situation, how can we achieve the mutual communication and exchange among people around the world that Professor Muto raised?
Yes, COVID played a role in that, but it's not just because of COVID. COVID laid bare the tendencies which are already there. Well, it's a very interesting case of our friend Seiko, Seiko Hashi, who is working for many, many years in international solidarity work. And she was working for a solidarity movement with the Philippines. She actually lived in Philippine village, and she married to a Filipino man who was formerly an NPA soldier. One thing she, and not only she herself, but also the solidarity movement was doing, was to take high school or middle school boys and girls to the Philippines and arrange a meeting with the Philippine local girls and boys of the same age and get them together. It's a very difficult time because the background is so different. Mostly middle class Japanese, and they're thrown into that environment. Well, actually, for instance, what is most important for you? Most necessary thing for you is a question asked to both. And Japanese said the cellular phone or ketai, the the Filipino says water, and then begins some clash of ideas, the basic ideas, and then they spend 3-4 days together, and very good coordinator is involved, and they begin to the Japanese begin to see how the people in the Philippines, I mean the boys and girls of their age who are doing and working, the living, and they felt liberated. They liked the life there in a matter of a few days. So they come back totally changed. The taste, what they prefer to have is no longer advanced cell phone. This kind of activity they have been doing for 20 years or so. and they're still doing that. And so it's a kind of process that creates not the exchange of knowledge, but sort of the way human beings is human being. I think that level of humanity can be pursued and can be explored and can be successful if really good mediator is there. And the mediator is the key. That's the mediator to create the process.
那个直接到那个议题吧，就比较。
So I will. This topic might be a little bit too far. How can we reach the transgender, trans race, trans country, trans nation to reach this kind of just people to people connectivity? And this is my dream. And along with Professor Lau, we have visited many places. I myself have benefited a lot from this experience, to be able to be in their living space, to be able with them, with people. They are people in flesh, and you can reach them instead of just a concept, a notion, or just a country, a race, a religion. They are not just labeled as such. They are people. So to that question, I have a more common suggestion. So from conception to, you can start with to break this kind of concepts. You should not just sit and wait for them to push you some news, some information. Instead, you should reach out, should try to reach out to get your knowledge, your information. And from another point of view, you should walk out of your comfort zone to get out of this zone where it gives you in entertainment, to gives you knowledge and life. I have noticed something interesting that my students, so also I call them as my young colleagues, when they recommend me some movies, they will say this movie is it's good, but they will lead you to have some kind of bad mood. They might lead you to some depression. So along with that question, I think we should embrace something that causes us bad mood, something that gives us depression, as whether it is a text, a movie, a group of people. I think this is the starting point that we can get out of this self that is buried, that has surrounded by this kind of the walls that you build by yourself. So to start with, you can go to the people in China, that people who comes from a different background, to be to be able to have empathy with them, so that you can start to understand and start to join in the process of constructing people. And this is the people that would be able to meet the people from other place. So this would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Professor Dai, you mentioned before that the rise of China is in itself a problem. In your observation, is it moving in the direction of socialism or the opposite? Can China be the way out of our hope if we still have a hope? The revolution that was in China, can it be a legacy for contemplating a possible future, given that the logic of the revolution was quite different from the logic of modern capitalism of today?
在我反复宣布我无知的情况下，
So when I will keep saying I'm ignorant, but this is a big question to me. This is kind of difficult for me, but I will try to share what I am thinking. On one hand, first, the so-called Chinese China's way or Chinese path, to make China an exception from the West. So our history and our path is indeed not something that you can read from the politics or economics or history books or any kind of theoretical series. This is a completely new, that is not doesn't have any existing series. This path, this Chinese path, did accumulate lots of resources for our future, but these resources are not just ready-made and not just like there for us to pick up. On the contrary, from where we come and to where we are going, we have to give a lot. We have to pay lots of costs, which already include which also kind of hide or like cover up, buried our resources. So in order to recognize the legacies that from China's experience to build another future for China, or even for China, we have to dig them out. We have to organize and to organize all those resources. So I always use a metaphor. So the first job of the legacy barrier is to clear out the debt. That is all the metaphor that I have been using. So, you know, when we dig out the legacy, we also have to clear our debt, because China has the history of the 20th revolution, and also China has its own history. So on the resources for our way ahead, and also the debts from our past, or even the ghosts from the past, how are they presented in our nowadays world? I think is also one of the topic the first level that we have to think about when we are talking about this, discussing about this. So on the second hand, I hope that we can reach a consensus with people from all over the world. The consensus is that for 100 years, the logic that has been pushing China forward is it's this logic that we have to reach, we have to catch up with the West, that we have to so we are taking a shortcut. We are trying to catch up to the destination that the West has reached. So today, I think we have already kind of make that pass. We already have made that reach the destination like ahead of time, and it is already a physical truth that China has raised. But we have to see that, we have to know that the logic to catch up has already been effective. That we don't have any other model for us to catch up with. We don't have another model for China to stay in the logic of the modernism. I'm trying to keep going ahead. In order to go ahead, to reach further, we have to create. This is a necessity. So earlier, what Muto-san and Anita has commented, I think the most valuable lesson I've learned is that when we are in a blank, when we are facing this kind of brand new structure of the historical structure, what they have told us is that our creator cannot become from nothing. Our creation has to come from the history, come from what we have learned before, come from the human history, including Chinese own history. When we were in the face of such a catastrophe, of when the country is about to have this self-demise, but this country stand up. So we have something to learn from there. So for here we have one consensus, that is this logic of catching up has already lost its effectiveness. Now China is facing another challenge, that is how to go further ahead. And this future could be, this China's future could become could offer some experience for the whole human being. But this is my hope. This is where I lay my hope. Can China really become, can this dream become a reality? We have to go back to the creation of people, the creativity of the people. So from a very basic point of view, that the China's rest comes from the legacy of the revolution, from the benefits of from the surplus of the people. Because I really, although I don't like this economic term, but it's true that we do have a large population and people's the labor accumulated the primitive accumulation for the countries to the country to develop. So in order to go further than this, we know that it's still the basic truth of China, and also on which China can build its future on. That's all I want to share. Thank you.
From the Zoom chat, and I'd like Anita to respond to this. Is Maria Pakpahan, who says, I think it's not either or alias binary position between modern civilization with its some bad impact. We need to recognize the benefit of modern civilization too. What may be more useful is to find ways to synchronize and synthesize what are positive legacy that modern civilizations, the legacy that modern civilization gives us, and try to get rid of its bad stuff like an isolated and loneliness as example. So Professor Rampal, would you like to respond to this question?
I would just say that, sometimes it's, we tend to think that we can look at positives and negatives, and I think that's not always possible. The way things develop and evolve, we can't just take out strands differently. I think, yes, we can learn from, like I was saying, how historians and anthropologists are telling us we can learn from the way humanity has developed and worked, and how we have lived in a different way, and not assume that it's only in the last 2 millennia that life has evolved the way we are looking at it. So yes, we can do a lot of learning from there, but we have to consciously steer the path forward, and that is important. So I think that we have to understand that if we have, what is the goal that we are looking for? How do we look at progress? I think that's what the definition is, and that's what people are telling us to rethink. And so if justice and if equity and if everyone, whether it's humans, non-humans, the place of people and ecological justice is something that we think is what humanity, that's the way humanity has evolved, then yes, then we can question things that today are going against that. We can question what is happening with modern tools and modernization that is actually causing much more damage, causing damage to our own generations. I mean, causing us and our own planets and our own future that is going to come. And I think that would be important to really take it as part of our learning and part of our affirmation. We are affirming that we know how things can be done differently. We are not saying that we don't know anything and we are all blank and we are ignorant. So I would not like to look at it as positive and negative, but yes, I would like to look at it as a very critical way, a critical conscious way of looking at the way humanity has developed and how we can steer our path differently.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much. I can see that we have some dear friends with us tonight. That's Professor Beverly Silver, Professor Mohanty, Professor Lee Jong-ok, Professor Lin Chun, Professor Yan Aibin, Professor Gao Ming, and Professor Teng Wei. So we have not had the opportunity to listen to you all and to other friends. But then since this is our first lecture, first session for the whole 5 weeks, so please come again and we hope we can hear you. And if you, well, we will be hearing more from Professor, from Muto-san because whenever we say Professor Muto, Muto-san would say, I'm not professor, but actually he was professor at Binghamton. So we will be hearing more from him on July the 17th at 3 o'clock Hong Kong time, which is 7 o'clock UTC time. And he will be discussing together with Swinker Surichai and Samuel Lee the questions about modernization of Asia and of East Asia. And and on Sunday, July the 10th, we are going to hear Professor Silver, who is very well known for the world systems theory, and that will be moderated by Professor Wen-Tie Jun. And tomorrow, we are going to have the lecture from Professor Wen-Tie Jun and moderated by Dr. Yan Xiaohui. And the discussants will be Alexander Buskalin from Russia and Pedro Paez from Ecuador. So I think, well, you could go to the website and see that we are going to have very exciting discussions. But I thank again our speakers tonight. I thank Professor DAI and Professor Muto and Professor Rampal for their very thoughtful and illuminating ideas. So thank you all for joining us, and good night.